Okay, Chapter 7. In this chapter, we're going to talk about command of initial emergency operations. A lot of it is going to be talking about incident command system. And again, just like the other chapters, there's a lot of information in the textbook. I picked out things that I think are important for you as a new fire officer, and I try to keep the lectures, fairly short and interesting. And again, if you're taking the state test, it's incumbent upon you to know the material. Um, just one other thing about the this chapter, it doesn't have a lot of strategy and tactics. There is some command and control stuff in here, and again, I think for a good fire officer, you need to go out there and get the training. And some of the classes that I think you need to take is going to be building construction. You need to have a good knowledge of building construction and how fires react in buildings. So I do have a building construction class that I do. You also need strategy and tactics. So a good standalone strategy and tactics class I think will serve you well as a up and coming fire officer. I know if you're going to be doing if you're going to be looking for the state certification, you will need a standalone building construction class, and you will need a standalone fire strategy and tactics class. So, getting into this chapter, we're going to talk about the history of the incident command system. So, incident command is not something new. All right. Uh, we have new terminologies, new phrases. We may think that the incident command system is fairly new, but it's not. So on the two pictures I have on the slide here, this is basically some command and control stuff that I pulled out of some textbooks. Now these books were written, they were copyrighted in 1974, but the material was probably around in, at least I would say, the early 1960s, possibly even earlier. So it does show that there is a command and control at fires. So there is some kind of incident command. However, it probably wasn't called that back then. You had a chief officer that was in charge, and you had captains, lieutenants, and there was a hierarchy. There was a command, model that everyone followed. So it wasn't like the command system that we use today, but there was a command system back in the 1950s, 1960s, earlier, even going back to the 1800s. There was somebody in charge of a fire. So you can see in the picture here we have our fire officer, and he is holding in his left hand, and again, it's not a bugle, it's actually called a speaking trumpet. So it would magnify his voice when he gave orders to firefighters on the fire ground. So even going back to the 1800s, there was some type of command structure, some type of hierarchy at a fire, in order to have, so if someone was in charge, they gave orders to the other firefighters on the fire ground. So moving ahead, we talk about the history of the incident command system. Now, on the left, it's a picture of, it's supposed to be Chief Brunacini from Phoenix, and we'll talk about him in a couple of seconds. But the incident command system that we use today had its roots back in the 1970s with the California forest fires. In California, as it is today, there was always a fire season, and there were large-scale forest fires. So California came up with a way to manage these large-scale forest fires with all these resources and personnel were coming into the scene. So that program was originally called FireScope. And again, that was developed during the large wildland fires in California in the early 1970s. So the Fireground Command System was developed by Chief Brunacini from the Phoenix Fire Department, again in the late 1970s, early 80s. But he took the FireScope model that was being used for wildland fires and he adapted it to structural firefighting. And that was really the first formal incident command system training that really got out into the fire service in those years back in the 80s. And it's basically what I came up learning was the Brunacini Fireground Command model of incident. So later, probably in the 1980s, the two models, FireScope and the Fireground Command System, were basically merged into what is now known as the Incident Command System, and then later, well, actually now it's the Incident Management System, but we always call it Incident Command System. And now the technical name is the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, as we know it today. So when we talk about NIMS that we use today, we have different levels of the system. So basic introduction, this is what every firefighter gets in Firefighter 1. It's just an overview and an introduction to the basic incident management system. It kind of describes the terminologies of command and operations, logistics, sectors, divisions, groups, things like that. So just a basic overview of the command system. Then we move up to IMS 200, which is ICS for single resource or initial incident. So this is basically your day-to-day emergencies, such as a structure fire or other short-term incidents. These incidents usually don't last more than a few hours, and it's basically a limited number of resources over a short period of time. So moving up to the I-300, the intermediate ICS for expanding incidents, usually larger scale incidents, and again this could be a multi-day operation that would require incident action planning, all right, for operational periods. So if we're talking the forest fire and it's going to be ongoing for weeks at a time, there's going to be an incident action plan written for every day. It's going to be distributed to the firefighters out in the field. At some point there's going to be a turnover of personnel. We're going to be operating at a 24/7 schedule, so it's an around-the-clock operation. The ICS 300, the way it's laid out, can also be used as a planning tool and used for create incident action plans for large-scale events. This seems to work well, such as if you had large spectator events such as parades, fairs, concerts, even the national events such as, we'll say, the Super Bowl. Those are basically NIMS events that a lot of the planning is actually conducted by the U.S. military, and I do know a person that was in the Air Force who was a NIMS guy, and he was actually working behind the scenes at a Super Bowl event for the command and control of the operation. So ICS 300, great tool. If you can learn it, you can use it for just planning. It works. I think it works best as a planning model to plan for everyday things or even large scale. So ICS 400, Advanced Command and Control of Complex Incidents. And this would be for members operating at the general staff for large-scale incidents such as a hurricane, Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy. And this is mainly at the level of the emergency operation centers, especially at the state level. This really wouldn't apply too much or at all for the local level, the local incident commander. This is more for a state or actually a statewide, a national-wide, or regional-wide type of command model for large-scale, natural disasters. Probably the best way to institute it. Then we talk about ICS 700. Now again, just because the numbers get higher doesn't mean it's more intense. So 700 is just an introduction to the National Incident Management System for non-uniformed persons who will be part of an operation. So the people that might work in administration of a fire department, secretaries, staff people, it is also given to other stakeholders at large-scale events, trucking companies, things like that, agencies that are not fire or EMS or police agencies, but at large-scale events are used as a resource, and we interact with them. So they understand how the incident management system works and what their role in the incident management system is as basically a civilian contractor at a large scale event. And then the 800 model is basically a overview of incident management system for government policymakers. So on a local level, county, state officials, administrators, your local town council people who may not be involved in anything that involves an incident management system. So it gets them up to speed so they understand how this command and control system in their town operates at a larger scale event. So let's talk about some responsibilities of command. We look at command, and there's three principles that we can start to guide our incident action plan with. So the first one is life safety. So that would include rescue and search. So as the incident commander, the highest priority you start with life safety. All right. Is there someone at an incident that needs to be rescued? All right. If there's no life safety hazard, if there's no one to be rescued, then from the fire department perspective, the firefighters become the life hazard. All right. Secondly, we have incident stabilization or fire control. So after life safety, we have to think about fire control. Now, as the incident commander, you may have to do fire control first in order to get in to do a search. You may need to extinguish fire to have your search teams get into the building. You may have to do fire control and search simultaneously. You may have to place a hand line between areas to search and the fire. So incident stabilization is your second priority. And then your third priority would be property conservation. This is what we would call salvage and overhaul. All right, establishing command. Okay, so the first arriving unit or officer should assume command. All right, so you need to tell everybody, hey, that someone's in charge. So when you show up, you need to give an arrival report. So an arrival report is basically painting a picture of what you see, so everybody else that's responding, that's listening to the radio, can get an image in their head of what is going on at the scene at that moment when you get there. So now they can start um, developing a plan of, hey, what am I probably going to do when I get there, based on if I'm first due, second due, whatever. So a good arrival report, you would announce on location. I have a 2-story single family dwelling, wood frame, working fire on the second floor, the Alpha Delta corner. So I just painted a picture for everybody that's coming in that it's a 2-story house, it's a wood frame dwelling, it's single family, and there's a fire on the second floor on the front right corner. So I got that image in my mind. All right. So then basically you need to declare a strategy. So in firefighting, kind of like football, we basically use offensive or defensive strategy. Now, I do a class on decision making, incident decision making. You may or may not have had that course from me by this time, but it is a good class that I think it's a good class that I put together for how we make decisions. We talk about strategies, we talk a little bit about tactics, but it's mainly developing an incident action plan and how we develop an incident action plan, how we make decisions. So then you need to start to develop your incident action plan. And again, I'm not going to go into incident action planning here. We'll talk about it in the course at some point. But one thing I want to bring out is, along with your arrival report, if you can, get a 360 of the building. All right, try to get around the building, get a look to see what's going on in the back. You could pull up, give an arrival report from the front, nothing showing, and maybe because of the size of the building, because of the weather conditions, the wind conditions, you run around the back, and all of a sudden, you got flames coming out of 2 windows on the first floor, or maybe out of a walkout basement that you couldn't see from the front. So very important. Try to get that 360 in. So just a couple of guidelines for developing strategy and tactics. And again, this isn't a strategy and tactics class. It's not even a decision-making class. It's just kind of getting your feet wet a little bit as far as what you need to really concentrate on as a up-and-coming fire officer. So Lloyd Lehman, who was writing fire strategy and tactics books and command and control books back in the 50s, came up with a thing called RECIO VS. So the incident commander can use this as a check sheet when you're operating at a structure fire, and it's just going to give you those little cues as far as, all right, rescue, did I account for rescue, search and rescue, exposure protection, do I have to protect any exposures, confine the fire, how do I confine the fire, extinguish the fire, overhaul, ventilation, salvage. So just some cues as a checkoff sheet that you can use as a commander to make sure that you hit all these points, that you didn't miss anything. We also have a newer concept. All right, it's called Slice RS, and there is a video of Slice RS in the curriculum in Google Classroom, that if you haven't already looked at it, I would highly suggest you look at it. It is a good short video. All right, so Slice RS stands for size up, okay, locate the fire. Then we talk about control paths, flow paths, all right, and how do we control flow paths? And we need to identify a flow path by, as a front door flow path, as a window a flow path, and then they talk about cooling from a safe location. So if you have a large fire that's coming out the windows, we can knock that fire down from the outside real quick, burst of water with a straight stream. All right, basically they say you're resetting the fire. So you're resetting that flashover. So it's buying you time now to actually go in and use an interior attack to extinguish the fire. So this is not stand outside and put the fire out. It's knocking the fire down and then going in right away into an interior attack to finish putting the fire out. And then the RS stands for rescue and salvage. And these are actions of opportunity. So if there's a possibility to make a rescue or do a search, they need to be done right away, not in any type of order. And in salvage, if we can do anything to do with salvage to keep property damage to a minimum, we can take those actions, if we have the time, if the fire is already extinguished or whatever. So they're actions of opportunity. But if you haven't done so already, watch the video, Slice RS. A good video, and it'll give you a good idea of what they're talking about. Just one other thing, we talk about hitting the fire from the outside right away. All the studies from UL have shown that an outside stream, a straight stream from the outside into a fire area, does not push fire. Okay, I'll say that again. All the studies from UL using a straight stream, pushing water in from the outside, does not push fire. All right. Now, if you were using a fog stream covering the window, yes, that would wreak havoc on the inside. But a straight stream flown into a fire area does not push fire. It actually makes all the conditions inside the fire building better for the firefighters and for any victims that may still be in there. All right. And again, we're not standing outside putting the fire out from the outside. We're knocking the fire down real quick and going in. And again, all the UL studies, all the data coming back from the people that have been studying all these scenarios, fast water. The sooner you can get water onto the fire, the better off the situation is going to be. All right. So that concludes Chapter 7, at least my small part of Chapter 7. So thanks for watching. And again, be smart, stay disciplined, keep training. And remember, nothing we do is safe. That's why they called us. All right. Safety through tactical discipline. Okay, thanks.